master planning, design, construction, and operations. For the whole life cycle of the project, we are aiming at every single point, making sure that we're adding back to the environment and we're adding back to the people and the locals surrounding those giga projects. This change in approach, this shift in what we're trying to do does really elevate the bar for us. And it's no longer we're trying to sustain and maintain and minimize, we're also trying to add back. And I was fortunate enough to be from 2016, when we started the pre-concept planning for those giga projects to witness how that is done. To be honest, this is something that has not been done on that scale ever before. And one of the best decisions from the beginning was the engagement of the scientists. We engage with the scientists before we engage with the architects, the master planners, the designers, and the engineers. We wanted to understand the precise environment. What does it mean? It's very local. It's very specific. Yes, as you mentioned, Dr. Matt, we are operating at extreme conditions. The natural asset is already at extreme conditions, but it has been surviving at these conditions for centuries, for decades and centuries. So this could be looked at as an advantage on how do we tackle the interaction between the natural asset and the built asset, but also it could be looked at as also another threat because we are already operating at an extreme condition. Any further, when you further that, when you go that, it's very easy for that system to collapse. On one hand, the approach for regenerative tourism in terms of how we deliver the project in construction, in design and construction in particular, the designs, as Dr. Sumaya has mentioned, the designs themselves are being designed not only with a focus on the normal impact assessment, that we're focusing on the minimization of the negative impact, but we're making sure that the design enhances the ecosystem service that these natural assets are providing them back to the people and providing back to the tourism offering. Now, the Red Sea Global, we're very proud that we are the first giga project to be open for business. Six Senses, our first resort, is open now, and people can book and stay now there already. St. Regis is within a few weeks, and then we have 19 more resorts that are coming online in the next year and a half, 2 years. This is a lot, and I want to assure you and assure the people that our guard is not down. We understand that all of what we've done in the past is just the beginning, and now is the beginning to make sure that we are extremely careful when the site is in operation. When people are visiting, people are traveling, people are diving, people are lying on the beach, these activities, these operational activities are being scrutinized really carefully. One is, we established our own subsidiaries to manage the tourist activation of the destination. So we're yes, of course, the resorts are being operated by world-renowned international operators, Rosewood, Six Senses, and Regis, Ritz-Carlton. So, but the destination activation, we are maintaining that control in terms of mobility and also in terms of the tourism offering and the activities that the tourists will do. We are maintaining that control. We fully understand that it was extremely hard to live up to that ambition and deliver on that ambition during design and construction. It is doubling harder to make sure that we also examine and make sure that we don't bring the system into failure, because a death by 1,000 cuts and a little compromise here and there and here and there will bring the system into failure, which we sure don't want to do.
Absolutely. I mean, I couldn't agree more. And maybe that takes me back to a question to you, Dr. Sumaya, because to the point that we've been hearing of the great effort, let's say, of uplifting, of doing a role of leadership that Red Sea Global has done, we can see the amount of assets and know-how and capacities that are needed to deploy some of these types of solutions. And what we intend to have is multiple projects at the level of scale and standard from an environmental perspective and sustainability perspective is that of Red Sea. The difficulty in your position is that these run a very wide gamut from what's called giga projects all the way down to small households in old neighborhoods that are being regenerated. How are you approaching at ADC sort of that capacity building perspective, but equally providing the different sets of demographics with the right kind of tools, guidelines that would enable them to translate these broader scientific goals and targets and policies into action on the ground?
Thank you so much. Such a great question. So capacity building or talent, the way we look at it, it's something that for us starts with kindergarten, as early as that sounds. They're not ready for the giga projects yet, but still, we see design as a life skill. So basically, if you equip children with that essential skill, they will also become active citizens who are able to speak to problems, who are able to talk things through. I think, perhaps one of the easiest things that our very young generation now has as a tool is, you don't like something, you block it. And we can't do that with climate change, right? So we need to find ways of creating that dialogue. Now, that's at a very early stage, but when it gets to university, that's where we look at two different ways of thinking about it. On the one hand, it's about standards and making sure that all of the programs are uplifted. It's not about the individual contributions of every program and letting it kind of sit somewhere, but rather making sure that they understand the aspirations at a national level and also the goals in the long term. And then what we do is we tackle it in two folds. One of them is we educate the educators, because design pedagogy is extremely important. And it's not about replicating what has been done for 40, 50 years in the design studio and not being close to real life problems, especially since these real life problems are now so pressing. In the level of urgency, I think that is felt around the world also needs to be felt in the design studio. And we don't see that yet. Also, when it comes to our graduates coming out, how many of them today are able to calculate the impact of a design that they have, whether it's a small building or a giga project? How many are able to understand the conversations around it? Because it's no longer about facade design or choosing materials or things like that. It's so much more scientific, and it needs a much wider array of let's say, a more generalist knowledge, but also the continuous capability to learn. And all of these components are extremely important. Part of what we then do as a commission, looking at all these complete, different components of it, is then making sure that we tap that talent into the right places. How do we find the best? Through perhaps competitions are some things that we've done, and also residency programs. And I'll give you maybe just an example that we have done with NEOM. So we had a competition for the design of public libraries. That was our first competition that we announced, done with 8 universities. And those best students that came out of it, we didn't just give them a prize money, because that could be the end of it, but we wanted to say, we found the best of the students. Now what do we do with them? So we gave them an internship at NEOM with their support, obviously. Now one of them is employed at NEOM. Something else that we did was a residency program, also collaborating with NEOM, where it was young students, but also young professionals. As far as I know, at least 3 of the 5 who participated are now employed. And if you find that, it's not us pushing and saying, please go and hire, our Saudi students. It's more about making the connections, and then, talent speaks for itself. And this is just one example, but we have many. So our partnership program is quite varied, strategic, and it means that we're able to tap into the different industries. And maybe to the last point that I want to mention here is also design leadership. I think that is extremely important. So today, when we look at the Council of Ministers, and this is part of what we jokingly say is our shadow strategy, you look at the Council of Ministers and you say, well, I have a lot of people in finance, business, and engineering. What would happen if they were architects and designers? So we want to make sure that more candidates, more high potential designers have the opportunity to be part of that, because we think they're more perhaps holistic in their understanding about what needs to happen and change. So that's it in a nutshell.
Yeah, I think that's brilliant, Dr. Sumaya. I share and I support fully wholeheartedly that kind of approach. What we're seeing sometimes lack in some of these conversations is a lack of diversity, and maybe a reminder to who we were as a people, that we're constantly in seeking of learning. We have a refrain that we always used to hear as when we were kids, طلب العلم فضيلة or عبادة, or that means that seeking knowledge is like prayer or practice of your own faith and religion. But that seemed to have been a refrain, and somewhere down the line, we've lost track of that deeper connectivity to that knowledge. I think equally something that I've been thinking about a bit more recently is our youth and the future, and how do we ensure that we're engaging with different age groups to understand that what the future is allowing them to do is much different than where we're starting from today in terms of the capacities and skill sets that Saudi Arabia of tomorrow needs versus where we're standing today. And that gets me to the question, sort of a long-winded way to get to you, Tom. As a curious reader myself, I've been keeping track of a lot of the unintended consequences, let's say, that could appear based on some well-intentioned interventions in key spaces. We've heard about the massive ambition of introducing trees that are not endemic to Saudi Arabia in the King Salman Park, given the size that you said it's 5 times?
Yes, 5 times Central Park,
Central
6
Park.
times the size of Hyde Park.
Just sort of reminded me of that story, and I see Adam, my fellow American in the audience, who was meant to be in the first row, but is somehow in the third today. Another question of the Asian carp, and when it was introduced in the United States in the Mississippi Basin with the intention of trying to tackle maybe some of the aquaculture, some of the sewage problems that have emerged, and unintendedly with massive rainfall and floods that have happened, they spread way beyond the Mississippi River to its tributaries. And now there's that mistake of trying to control the populations with annual awards for who gets to take the largest fish. So how are we ensuring that with some of these types of introductions, we're not having any unintended outcomes or consequences to that level of ambition?
Okay, if I might start by flipping that question back round. When it comes to the negative impacts of biodiversity, we always list those examples that you indicated there, where we have species that have run amok in other ecosystems. I think if nature has taught us anything, it's taught us that biodiversity is key in terms of ecosystem resilience. Nature has filled absolutely every facet of the planet in terms of that. So the more species diversity you have, the greater your resilience. In terms of the other constant that we're facing is a changing climate. So, you know, we're in an environment where holding true to current ecosystems for particular environments won't necessarily be true in 5 or 10 or 15 years' time. I think what the challenge we have in the introduction of species is this potential arrogance that we have sometimes that we know best, that we know what is best for nature. We don't. All we can do from nature is learn from the ecosystems it has created, to work to introduce species in this environment that will increase the range across the kingdom in terms of that, but to monitor that as well, to control, monitor biosecurity when it comes in, monitoring program in place with organizations such as KAUST in terms of that, around how we monitor the impact of these species. But sustainability long-term is also around sustainability for your population, for the citizens of Riyadh. They're going to want a park that they want to enjoy. So from that point of view, there's a whole education piece that sits in that as well, around the range and difference in terms of biodiversity. We will prioritize local species. There's biodiversity action plan that will be in place in terms of that. But I think we really need to create a landscape that will sustain moving forward. It's a landscape that needs to shift. It's a landscape that needs to have that capacity to be resilient. And we will do that through species. We'll do it through landform, we'll do it through irrigation, but we'll also do it through species. But we'll do it in a way that we monitor, manage, control those species to try and avoid those instances. Will we avoid them completely? I don't know. But what we will do is build a biodiverse template on which to try and create the park that will sustain itself within Riyadh for the next 10, 15, 20, 200, 300 years.
I think that's a good answer. Good job.
To a difficult question.
Well, we try not to make it too comfortable to our colleagues here, because we have a deep recognition of the knowledge and depth of it that they bring to the table. But that sort of is a perfect segue back to you, Ra'ed. I think we've done so much damage, and we were lucky to have a good friend of ours, Johan Rockström, here yesterday to remind us of the challenges at hand when we're looking at these planetary boundaries and the areas in which some of these are feeling the pressure and are being exceeded. I might turn back to the issue of corals and their adaptation and this knowledge and recognition. I always say this as an example. If I am to eat my favorite fish in Jeddah, I have to recognize and protect the shores of Sudan because that's where that fish starts its lifetime. So to have a deeper understanding of how are you approaching this regeneration and resilience effort, what do you see as a positive externality that might emerge from Red Sea project and their ambitious program across the Red Sea, both on the Saudi coast, but also beyond?
I don't just think it's a good question. I actually like the question very, very much. And this is because that in the past maybe year and a half, me, myself, and my team in particular within Red Sea Global, we have become very, we've developed a huge passion towards sharing the knowledge that we have learned. We have been, privileged to be in a very unique position. we went through a learning curve. We've developed understandings. This is documented. This is all, we're still within Red Sea Global. And so we're reaching out to the world. We're reaching out to, especially then, the governmental and non-governmental organizations within Saudi and the authorities to share all of that knowledge. And I think one of those is the cost of regeneration. It is not that high. It is a manageable cost. You can still maintain a profitable giga development and a reasonable return on your investment while still having it to make a significant direct investment into the natural asset. One of the things that I also learned, and maybe also about 20 years ago or 15 years ago, I used to work in the oil and gas industry, and I've learned so much from the oil and gas industry. One of the things is that the different approach now for Red Sea Global is that the main attraction for the tourists to come is the natural asset. So the investment into the natural asset does make perfect sense. So if you approach any development, any industry, in any of the sectors where you have multiple returns from your investment in the natural asset, this is from the get-go. If you develop a business model where the investment into the natural asset and the investment into the people will have a return on investment on you, a financial return on investment, this is the perfect model. Then you really need not to convince anybody, the CEO, the CFO, the COO, you need not to convince no one of what is the right thing to do. This is in their own best interest. And I think that's what has enabled us. I mean, with also the huge backing from the government of Saudi. We're wholly owned by PIF, our shareholder. And so we have that privilege, and we've learned how does that make a huge difference. I am approached by many of the startups and the new startups in PIF, and this is my main advice to them. I have two, if I can summarize 6 years of a unique experience, really an incredible experience, once in a multiple lifetime opportunity, is I want to say number one is the right business model will protect the environment, will have a return on the environment, the species, the habitats, and the people. But it's the right business model from the get-go. And the second thing is, it's a very simple slogan that we always talk about: teamwork and collaboration. I was privileged, as you said, to be in the negotiations teams with Saudi. My focus at the time was on monitoring, reporting, and verification of greenhouse gases. I have witnessed, Saudis who, especially young Saudis, young men and women who come together, not for a promotion or an increase in salary or a reward from their employer, but they do all come together for the honor to represent Saudi, and they also come together for a higher purpose. And I witnessed this happening again with Vision 2030 within the giga-projects. Many people. I want to say more than 90% of the people in my team, environmental sustainability team, are not there for the money. They can get more. They can have a better salary somewhere else, even within Saudi. They're there because they believe that Red Sea Global is doing the right thing. They're there because they have a chance to realize their value in their effort and their technical knowledge and their scientific knowledge in environment and social and engineering sustainability. So those two, I think, this is the learnings that we want to share. Of course, there are many. We have, especially with you've mentioned in your previous question, the bleaching events. and the global bleaching events. The Red Sea is part of that, and the Red Sea did, it's not an independent system. So what we have learned from the differences of what has happened within Al Wajh Lagoon, where Red Sea project is, and what has happened at Amala, where, where Amala project is, those differences is the main focus point that we're talking to the government and we're talking to KAUSK, our main partners in Red Sea Global, on the huge amount of learning on how do we then try to create a future for those corals that where they will survive, hopefully inshallah not 3 degrees, but the increase in temperature over time.
I think that was a very eloquent end to that, Ra'ed. I think we're both in agreement, and I hope the rest of the panels and people who are joining us in the room are also in agreement that we are definitely working our utmost to avoid a 1.5 global average, let alone a 3-degree world. And if there's anyone that's there to hopefully aim to deliver on it, it's our level of excitement, both in the panel, and it's with the collaboration with those that are with us in the room, but also beyond. And maybe with that as an opening to question any of the ideas that we've put forth, but also any additional clarifications that you might need. So can we get a few microphones?
Thank you. Let me introduce myself. My name is Farid Yassin. I am the Iraqi climate envoy, and I have been part of the negotiations as a staffer of the convention secretariat at COP2, COP3, and COP4. And I've seen the development of the Saudi negotiators that is absolutely stunning and heartwarming. And these are people I call friends, and I admire them. Thank you for this. My question has to do with the point that you can't be resilient on your own. You're either resilient with your neighbors or you're not. And so my question is, what about collaboration? You talked about the Red Sea. There's another body of water on the other side. Some people call it the Persian Gulf. Others call it the Arabian Gulf. We call it the Gulf of Basra. And there is room to collaborate. Our corals are also being affected. But the point is that everybody now is trying to work hard to achieve 1.5. And as you said, 1.5 is an average, and that's not what's going to happen in our part of the world. It will even impact the way we live our lives. There are people who are doing studies to see whether we will be able to perform our religious duties of the Hajj under conditions of 3, 4, 5 degrees. I don't know. What do you see as possibilities of collaboration between us? And full disclosure, I'm starting from the premise that our Prime Minister in New York actually launched the idea of starting a negotiating group within the UNFCCC that would gather the GCC, Iraq, and Iran to promote our interests and defend the rights of our people. And in fact, went even further to talk about the possibility of setting up a regional organization that would try to promote the agendas required to address climate change and to achieve resilience. There is, in fact, one such organization in the Gulf. It's called ROPME, but even people in Kuwait haven't heard about it. So it's probably a good base to start with. I don't know, so I'll pass it on to you there and see.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I can kickstart it, and I saw Noura, you raise your hand, so I'm happy for you to elaborate. But at least in Saudi Arabia, when we chose to go down the pathway of our own policies for climate, we chose to not solely do the Saudi Green Initiative, but there was a clear recognition that without a Middle East Green Initiative, none of our Saudi Green Initiative goals and targets will be able to be achieved. I always give a very simple example of air particles and dust storms in Riyadh. I started my life as an asthmatic child at the end of the first Gulf War, having a bit of trouble breathing, and we spent some time in the desert. And in spite of that, I was able to breathe clean air. But unfortunately, because of the environmental deterioration and the pressures upon the Delta in Iraq, we are witnessing more frequent dust storms in Riyadh, in addition to other environmental degradation around Al-Hilal Al-Khasib, or what was called the Fertile Crescent. I mean, the commitments as well of planting 10 billion trees or tree equivalents in Saudi Arabia was matched with an additional commitment of 40 billion trees or tree equivalents within the greater Middle East. And I think those are great, maybe first steps. The creation of a climate change center that looks at it more from a regional perspective. I once joked with a friend of ours at the IPCC and thanking him on behalf of our region for giving us a hexagon, but stating that they forgot the Red Sea and the very important Gulf and those kinds of considerations. That type of science, know-how that needs to be developed and homegrown, as opposed to waiting for others to develop on our behalf. And to the point that you were putting across at the very end, I think there's a renewed vigor in diplomacy for our region. So combination of the GCC and Iraq and Iran comes into play. I think some of the hottest regions that might be recorded globally in a future projection will be along the coast of that Gulf, irrespective of how some of us might name it. I don't know, Noura, if you wanted to elaborate on that.
Yeah, maybe I can talk more about collaborations within the negotiation rooms or within the UNFCCC framework and outside of the UNFCCC framework. I think, unfortunately, everyone's working very hard to find an agreement, but I think the reality is that what happens within the negotiation room is fraught with adversity, right? Because everyone's trying to protect their own interests, rightfully so, even though they're all working towards the same goal. Right, but it's this system that does not allow for collaboration in a sense that one, it's marred with lack of trust, and second, there's a litigation aspect of it. Right, if you commit to something today and you renege, then that won't be nice, you know, right? So for Saudi, we have our NDCs, and we often meet people who tell us, well, why aren't you upping your NDCs? Why are you saying it that? Well, in reality, what we are doing on the ground, there is a lot more than what we are committed to under the UNFCCC process. I mean, just look around you, and we've heard from everyone here today that what we're doing is way, above and beyond that. But it's because of that process, which is absolutely necessary, and it's sending the right signals to the world and the market. But in reality, it's also allowing for creating collaboration opportunities outside the negotiation rooms. And I think we've spoken to many of our counterparts around COP, moving around. There are a lot of business deals. There are a lot of cross bilateral agreements between countries that are happening. And I think that is where most of the collaboration will start from and emerge, and hopefully have a positive impact on the negotiation spaces as well.
I saw another question over here. The lady on the second row.
First of all, thank you so much for all this amazing discussion. It's very valuable. My name is Dr. Fatma Jubran. I'm a former associate professor. And thank you for all the information. But my question for Dr. Sumaya, when you find, in order, from the perspective of collaboration, there is, international collaboration and internal collaboration. And when you succeed with your internal collaboration, you will succeed with international collaboration. So I really love the ideas that you present about the building and climate change, for example, because sometimes we see ozone and climate change, hydrogen and climate change, urban and climate change, but the building and climate change need to be more intersect with all interdisciplinary measure that was presented here, to be more intersected and more engaged. Because in my experience in the university, I already did your case, but in individual levels. But I have that model and I experienced it. I have a lot of results. I have a lot of evidences. So maybe my talk today is not a question or not an answer, it's an offer. So if I could collaborate with you or give you some of my experience and satisfy together, because it was for me in a very small measure and experienced that model for 7 years. It was really amazing. I called it triangle philosophy. It's reached the vision of 2030. It reached the international and local. So that's what I want to say. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. We have one last question over here. Shukran Naif.
Assalamu alaikum. My name is Mohammed Minhaj. I live in Silicon Valley. And I specialize in building new industries. And I used to be technology advisor to Dr. Mahathir Mohamad of Malaysia. And I built a microchip design industry with the benefit of $32 billion. Now I'm building climate change as an industry. This is a beautiful panel. I mean, we have the education part, the policy, the design, and the builder. So excellent. I mean, this is how you build an industry. One of the things that I'm looking at is, definitely climate change is going to affect food production. And food security of nations is a very big subject right now. And Professor Yoshi, I mean, he mentioned that in the last 30 years, we have grown only 50% food. But I'm looking at it with the climate change, we'll have to grow 270% more food. One of the things, and I think this goes for Sumaya and Raed, is there anything that people are working on combining renewable energy with agriculture? So this way we have more food grown, but at the same time it is very sustainable. Anybody working on that?
Renewable energy. Red Sea project is 100% run by renewable. We are totally off the grid for Red Sea project. Amala project is also working to be 100% run by powered by renewable and off the grid. Within Red Sea project, I can talk for a long time, and I'm happy to have a chat with you after this. I can talk towards the agriculture that we are establishing within the project, to the vertical farms that we are going to be run 100% on renewable. I can talk to you about the generation of water for the landscaping that we have and where it is coming from, which is generated also which is also powered by renewable. I can talk to you about the a program that is very, very dear to my heart, and that program is the value of the fish that is in the Red Sea. That fish, within our culture, within our custom, that fish is the most delicious and has the best reputation in terms of the best fish that is caught on the Red Sea for everybody that lives on the Red Sea. And what we're trying to do now is train and educate the fishermen, and those fishermen are going to follow courses. And in terms of them, when this fish is caught, we're going to ensure that the practices of the fishing practices are sustainable, so that the corals are not impacted. But then also when that fish is caught, it's caught in a sustainable way, so that we can then provide the demand for that fish. And then that demand would not come from that fish being offered in quantities that are not sustainable and in markets that are not sustainable, but also in luxury and ultra luxury tourist markets, where then that fish, the return on investment will be a lot higher. So inshallah, we're looking at things from all perspectives, not just from the perspective of trying to import a technology or deploy technology that would work here and there. We're also looking at the existing practices within Saudi, and how do we then also apply a better management approach, so that we ensure the giga tourism projects adds and enhances the standard of living for the people, and then vice versa. The output from the local economy and from the culture, and the output from the socioeconomic situation surrounding the projects is also enhancing the experiences for the tourists and also supporting the offering of the project.
I think this is actually a question for NEOM. I'm not sure if there's anyone here from NEOM, but they are investing tremendously in food security. And I know that I was just on a panel recently where I heard them speak of an investment of about 20 billion in Blue Nalo, which looks at cell-cultured fish, at the most efficient levels of, utilizing resources and energy. And we all know that, NEOM is powered fully by renewables or clean energy. So I think that's an example. It's unfortunate there's no one here from NEOM. I just wanted to share that piece of information.
Thank you, Nora. I think with that, we wrap up. Gulin, sure.
It's not necessarily a question, but I was listening and I couldn't help but reflect after the panel was over. And thank you so much for all the things that you shared on all the great work. I feel like there's this common thread of design that's coming up because we're looking at what the world is and Saudi Arabia is going to look like in the future. And from all the aspects, from urban planning, from food systems, from energy, we're looking at designing all of them in a new way, or redesigning them, or maybe envisioning them in a new way. So, and you also mentioned a couple of things about design, but from that systemic perspective, that the notions around design that's not necessarily related to built environment or designing, retail industry, etc. So, but the bigger notion of design and designing systems. Just was curious about your reflections and your thoughts on that, and how does that show up in your work? So when we talk about Red Sea, it's a whole new project that's designed from the ground up, NEOM itself, and everything actually is being designed actually. But where do you think it comes up in the work that you do?
Okay, so one thing maybe that I neglected to talk about is actually what we mean by architecture and design. So we look at it as 6 kind of disciplines, but they're not in silos again. So they operate on a spectrum. So from the macro to the micro, we have urban design, planning, we have architecture, we have landscape architecture, interior design, industrial design, and that's where we look at product, systems, services, and then ultimately graphic design, where you might have your campaigns, everything visual that you see. So when we talk about how we influence design, we always think along that spectrum and what level of influence we have. And then thinking about it in some sort of a matrix way, we also think about, what do we do at the policy level? What do we do at the education level? What do we do at research? And how do we also talk to people and disseminate? Thinking about the paradigm shift that actually needs to happen is not about just doing it in one place. And one thing that we have been finding in discussions, let's say with professionals, when we talk with architects and designers, is that they'll say, we know the theories of how to design these things, but can you find us a contractor who's actually going to deliver? So then it's a matter of, how do you then connect it to the construction industry? So understanding these connections and making sure that we look at all the obstacles and remove them, not just on our own, because I think with each one of us, our mandate does have limitations, regardless of how ambitious we are, but it does go back to the strategic partnerships and the alliances and the national vision of what we want to achieve. That is where we then iron out these obstacles. And that takes time, because we are looking at, major systems, complex systems of systems. So that is something where our influence and intervention maybe today is something that we may think we are able to predict, even in the very near future. But I think with the technological advancements, the dynamic components that are happening, the vulnerabilities that are currently there already, a lot of that is very volatile. So we'll have to take things one step at a time, but not losing sight of the overall goal. I hope that answers it to a certain extent, but yeah, that's the best I can do.
I think that's a perfect answer, and maybe a perfect end to our conversation. Just a reminder that for us to be able to deliver that resilient tomorrow, we need everyone all across the spectrum. So a whole of society and a whole of discipline approach to be able to get us to a safer space. And on our side, we promise you, I hope, between Matt, Mohammed, and I, and the bigger group of brilliant individuals that are carrying the bulk of the weight, to continue to deliver on that and to continue our curiosity, but also not solely from an academic perspective, but equally from a translational piece. And with that, maybe encourage you to continue this conversation with us to the point that Matt was mentioning earlier. Any questions, any gaps that might emerge, feel free to share, because that will only add to the rigor of what we'll be able to deliver together. With that, thank you so much for staying with us.